Jack Owens is with us. Had a some people think a legendary career with the FBI. I don't know, but he was so enamored with the Bureau that when it was all over, he wrote a book entitled "Don't Shoot, We're Republicans: Memoirs of the FBI Agent Who Did Things His Own Way." Jack, we've got a lot of ground to cover, but I appreciate you coming up.
Oh, thank you, Paul. It's good to be here. I live close to here. Just a hop and a skip.
We feel safer knowing that than a former agent. So let's talk a little bit about your life first, because we'll get into your brief stint on Big Brother as well.
Yes.
How long were you on that, by the way?
I was on Big Brother for the summer of 2003. It was the Big Brother 4, the number 4, and I lasted 54 days and was voted out by the eventual winner, June Song, a Korean-American from New York City. She deserved to win. I mean, she ran circles.
Were they a little nervous having an XG man in the house?
Well, they were. But, Paul, they treated me like a mascot. I was 3 times the age of one of the cast members. I was 58. I was the oldest person ever to be on the show.
Shouldn't you have been on Survivor as opposed to Big Brother?
Well, I don't like sand in my underwear,
okay.
So I'm not going on Survivor.
Let's kind of go back a little bit. You have a law degree. You had a law degree from the University of Alabama.
Yes.
And at what point did you decide, I'm going to do something other than be a lawyer?
I was going to practice law in the Navy, and an agent came on campus and talked to the senior class, my class, and said, "Look, how would you like to have a car, a gun, and a credit card?"
Be an Auburn football player.
And I said, "Sure, sign me up." And J. Edgar Hoover was director then. And I was hired because they were hiring 1,000 agents that summer. My timing was good. And I came in June of 1969, and I left in August of 1999. Heck, Paul, I made a career out of it.
30 years. I imagine the pension's holding up pretty well.
But my law school classmates would come up to me on the streets of Birmingham or after cross-examining me in court, and they would say, "Jack, what are you doing? Get away from that government job, come in a law firm, make a lot of money, work 4 days a week. You'll love it." And I said, "Look, none of you have ever been in a tree in Anniston, Alabama at midnight on New Year's Eve during a rainstorm with a poncho that leaked waiting for a fugitive. I mean, you can't have fun like that being sensible, Paul."
So I know you told me earlier that at the time Hoover was looking for lawyers, but it seems like did it help did those years of law school at Alabama pay off for you?
I think it did. What you learn in law school is how to work all night, stay up all day and all night, and to drink coffee. So those are the 2 things that got me in the Bureau.
I think they also teach you in law school you can't beat up prisoners and stuff too. So I don't know if that worked or not, but your career is extraordinary. And when it was over, you wrote this book, which I'm sure was an interesting, if not a cathartic experience. Yes. I don't know. I would imagine it would have been.
It was interesting to go back and look at what I'd done. My career was typical of many agents. I was a street agent. I liked being in the trenches of federal law enforcement. I never wanted promotion, Paul. I never wanted to go to FBI headquarters. I liked being in Birmingham. I was in Denver for a year, 1969, 1970. And then the rest of my career here in Birmingham, 29 years in this office, a very important FBI office, very busy. I loved my career here.
Well, and certainly during that time, you're coming out of the height of the civil rights movement, even though the FBI certainly reopened a number of cases, the infamous church bombing case. You were involved in the tragic bombing of the federal judge.
Yes, Judge Vance. Yes,
and I've heard friends of yours mention this, but you were also involved in one of the most famous murder manhunts in the South, if not the country's history, the Atlanta murders.
Yes, Wayne Williams was convicted of the crimes over a 2-year period, a serial killer who killed almost 2 dozen black teenagers in Atlanta. There was some question about how many crimes he committed. Some went up over 30. I think the FBI settled on 19, 20, 21, somewhere in there. But it was a horrible time for Atlanta, and people were afraid. My job was to sit on a bridge over the Chattahoochee for 2 weeks from sundown to sunup. I had 2 Atlanta police officers with me.
Was he dropping bodies in there?
He was.
Okay.
He was dropping bodies on land, and we were getting evidence, hairs and fiber evidence, off of the bodies. And that information got into the newspapers. So the FBI profiler said, why don't we put people on the bridges over the Chattahoochee? Because this guy is smart, and he's going to start dumping bodies in the river. And he did. Wayne Williams, on the 14th night, we were 2 hours away from leaving for good. He dumped a body off the Jackson Parkway Bridge into the Chattahoochee River, and it surfaced 2 days later downstream. But we pulled him over that night and questioned him. And Paul, the profile on the killer was he'd be driving a station wagon, be a black male in his mid-20s, be kind of a police groupie, would have a dog, a Doberman or a German Shepherd, and he would put the clothing of his victims in the back of his car, and he would have some fibers off of his house on the victims or in the car, and that all turned out to be true.
So you pull him over.
He pulled up, dumped.
Obviously, let him go.
We had to question him that night, and he was let go.
Did you think it was him?
I did. But it wasn't my bridge. I was one bridge down. My bridge sucked. I was on the wrong bridge.
You pulled it. And for those who don't remember, this was, 30 years ago?
Yes, 1981.
I mean, this was the story in this was the 80s version of Son of Sam.
Yes.
And everyone was scared. I talked to someone here today. I told him you were coming up and worked that case, and he said, I was a little kid back then. I was scared to death, and that was in Birmingham. Yeah. Everyone was scared to death.
It was a very frightening time. People were afraid to go out during the day or night in Atlanta. The profile turned out to be exactly.
So what happened when you pulled Williams over?
Well, one of the first things that Williams said when he got out of the car, not to me, but to my partner.
He said, I didn't do it.
He said, "Oh, I bet you stopped me on all these murders around here." I mean, we could have stopped him on a taillight. You know? So, I mean, that was the first thing.
You were with Atlanta PD?
I was working with Atlanta PD, and my partner, Greg Gilliland, an FBI agent, was one bridge up, the Jackson Parkway Bridge, by himself. And he watched Williams at 4 a.m. get out of his station wagon with this big garbage bag and heavy, and he took it out of the back of the wagon and drug it over to the edge of the bridge and lifted it and dumped it in the water. And the poor police cadet, who's down on the water being eaten up by critters and mosquitoes and snakes, he said, "Whoa, someone dropped a big something into the water."
Wonder what that is.
I wonder what that could be. And it turned out it was Wayne Williams' victim, Nathaniel Carter, his last victim. And Williams was convicted on circumstantial evidence, on lab evidence, Paul, and he did not get the death penalty. He's still serving time in Georgia, and occasionally he will surface in the media and do an interview saying, "I'm innocent. I didn't commit these crimes. I should be released." But he's guilty. We know he's guilty. We nailed him on the lab evidence.
When you let him go, obviously there's only so far you can go. But what was going through your mind when this nationwide manhunt knocks on your door?
I didn't want to let him go. I said, let's keep this guy and question him. But the decision was made higher up to let him go. We bumper locked him and watched him for a while until we got more evidence. We got a search warrant. Went into his house, went into his car, and there we found all this evidence from the victims. He was murdering some of these young men in his bedroom, and carpet fibers from his bedroom were on the victims, and that led to his conviction. I was hoping he'd get a death penalty, but he didn't. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison.
Jack obviously has done a number of. It's hard to chisel a whole career into a couple of minutes, although you did it in a book. But other than that, what case still comes up to this day?
Well, I worked a number of fugitive matters, and it wasn't working the fugitive matters that was so interesting. It was being on the SWAT team and the camaraderie of that unit. We called ourselves Ninja Turtles, and we worked as a really tight unit. There were 5 of us initially. Now there are more on SWAT teams. But, Paul, what I did, I worked counterintelligence, and I worked undercover during the Cold War against hostile intelligence services. I kept my foot in the SWAT team. I was one of the few agents in the FBI working counterintelligence and working on the SWAT operations. And working undercover for 4 years during the Cold War, and then working on SWAT operations back and forth. Those are the most interesting things that I did. I covet my friendships, my colleagues, or many of them are still here in Birmingham. We meet once a month to
that would be a reality show.
To eat. we tell war stories. What you do in the FBI, you drink coffee and you eat breakfast.
Now, in terms of let's say what you were doing covert-wise, an FBI agent, I mean, everyone understands, I think most people understand the difference between the FBI and the CIA, but
yes.
How different would it be?
The Bureau's jurisdiction is internal. We're a counterintelligence agency. The Bureau stops spying activities inside the United States. The CIA, on the other hand, is an intelligence gathering organization. They work covertly overseas. And we said during the Cold War, the Bureau, we could fight the Cold War a lot better if we only had an office in Moscow. And now, Paul, we do.
Wow.
The FBI has an office in the American Embassy in Moscow. Things have changed. The Cold War is gone. I miss the Cold War, the clarity of it. Terrorism is tougher.
I can imagine. And we're gonna welcome callers in on this conversation with Jack Owens. He'd written a book. Finally, before we get to this break, I bet you retire and you do Big Brother. You try out for American Idol and all these other things. Writing the book, though, is that something you'd always wanted to do?
Yes, I've always wanted to be a writer. The Bureau is a jealous mistress. Agents can't publish, with a few exceptions. So I knew after 30 years I wanted to retire. I'd done it. I wanted to write. And at first I was published in the magazine articles, had about a dozen published. And then I wrote some novels that have been rejected. And then I wrote my memoir, which was picked up right away by History Publishing Company in Palisades, New York, and published in 2009. I like being a writer. I like the challenge of it. It's more fun, Paul, to have written than to sit down and write. And you know that. You're an author. You know exactly what I mean.
My memoir is upcoming. Don't shoot. We're Republicans. It's Jack Owens' story. We'll continue this conversation. We'll also welcome you in. I know a lot of folks will want to get in, and I would recommend doing it early. 866-765-7285, 741-9450. More with former FBI agent, 30 years in the Bureau, Jack Owens, after this.